showing them that we can provision an environment, 0 to everything in 15 minutes.
One down. Great. So, I'm Scott Feinberg. I work for a company called Papercall, which is this awesome CFP app. During the day, I work for the New York Times. Big Red Monk fan. I homebrew back in the States, and I drink beers. So, today we're going to talk about Papercall. Papercall is the ultimate side project. It's very much, you've heard a lot of talks about people's successes and things like that, and as a self-deprecating New Yorker, I'm going to tell you about all the shitty things about Papercall and building it, and if this doesn't convince you not to do a side project, nothing else will. In which case you should totally do it. Cool. So, the first question when you're talking about a side project is who is behind it? It's myself and my co-founder Mark, and it's just us. We both have day jobs. Mark is the director of engineering at InfluxDB, building Go microservices all day, and I design APIs at the New York Times. Both like pretty good jobs, we like to think. So we decided that we would start this CFP app, because what Papercall is a CFP submission system. Who has ever submitted a talk through Papercall? Okay, a few people. If you already, apparently a lot of the speakers left. Papercall allows you to propose talks to conferences. And both Mark and I spoke a lot, worked on a lot of conferences, and we decided that the system was broken. The system, which is this like weird, like there's a lot of like Google forms and Wufoo forms and like email me and like make your subject line this. I saw one the other day where it's like fax in, like print out this PDF, handwrite on it, fax it in. Yep, obviously. And that's, so we decided like this is something that we can fix. And being developers, we could fix it ourselves. As James alluded to, he ran into some problems with Papercall, and of the 40 conferences that have used this product, he's the only one that's ever had this problem. So while like the design is actually totally new, originally it was 100% like bootstrap. Now it's like actually like designed out by like a professional-ish, he like missed where the like select speakers button it is. It's like right there, big, select speakers. He missed that, and that's okay. And we need to fix that, but we totally acknowledge that our documentation is incredibly poor, because when it's your side project, you're focused on adding features, not on like documenting it to make it usable. That's just kind of like how it works. So this is the home page. Doesn't it look nice? For a while, we didn't even have a home page. That was cool. We have an Open CFPs link up there if you want to find conferences. Probably next week that will not only include our CFPs, but all the CFPs out there. Why Papercall? We saw a problem. We wanted to fix it, as most people's side projects or products start. So yesterday, there's this talk of the side hustle. And that really speaks to Papercall in a lot of ways, because Papercall doesn't make any money right now, but it was built because it added value to me and Mark. because as speakers, we felt this pain. We like knew how terrible this was. So even if Papercall never made any money, we'd at least have built an app that made our lives better when we want to go speak at conferences. And obviously it worked because like I'm here now after submitting. So how it all started, Mark and I were at this place called Elephant and Castle in Boston, a nice English pub, and there were actually originally 3 of us. One of them had, too much to do in his life to really continue. Like very early on, he was just like, yeah, I can't do this. So we, sat down over, I believe it was actually fish and chips, discussing like, there's this cool like idea, we should like fix CFPs. I was a developer evangelist at the time. And Mark was organizing conferences, meetups, things like that, and we were like, this is a problem that we can solve. So, obviously we're, a couple geeks. We have to start, pick our tech stack. So we're like, okay, this is our side project. So, obviously we should use our favorite toys. What do we want to use? This is going to be amazing. We're going to do it the right way because it's ours. So we were like, oh yeah, some fucking Go microservices. It's not like neither of us had ever used Go microservices before. This is literally what InfluxDB is. It's a time series database in Go. That's what Mark does all day, builds Go microservices. So it's not even like we were bad at it. But 4 months later, I call up Mark and I'm like, so, how are we feeling about the app? I have several conferences lined up. I'm doing the business end, he's doing the tech end, because I actually have a degree in business. That's literally how we divided what we were gonna do. And he's like, yeah, I'm not feeling super good about this. It's I don't know if we're gonna be ready in time. So we decided that maybe we should use something different, perhaps Rails, something we were both very experienced in and might allow us to build this a little bit faster. And sure enough, Rails, but we couldn't just give up everything. We also had to use Angular on the front end, because why not? So that's all well and good, and we actually launched with this, and things went, pretty well. Today though, it's now just Rails. We've also ripped out Angular in the redesign. It is Rails, ERB, just your classic Rails stack, and we're moving a lot faster because we don't have to figure out, how are we going to do authentication. When we first built the app, we were if you ever built Rails, you're I'm just going to use OmniAuth or something like that. My authentication login problem is solved. We were doing Go microservices, and we were what if we built a system where you didn't need a password, where we texted you or sent you an email that you clicked on, and then it logged you in, and that seems cool and all. But this is becoming its own side project off of our side project. And it's just so bad. And the repo still exists for that. But we haven't touched it in ages. This is the actual screenshot from GitHub. If you can't read that, the name of our repo is named Monolith. Because when I think about you, I hate myself. These were actual words spoken by Mark and I when we first built this. And because we were oh, this is so sad. But we move a lot faster because of it. So lesson 1, be boring and move fast. Don't try and be fancy. So our original funding plan for this is we were going to bootstrap this, and then we were actually going to throw conferences and generate money from conferences as a way of bootstrapping. And we thought that was interesting. And we're oh, this is so good. we can generate some like revenue, and we'll be like using the product. And guess what? It takes a lot of effort to like run a conference. And we actually end up so we both had we both worked on conferences. We'd never been the sole organizers of a conference, and Mark is a little more experienced in running conferences, but he's out like building our Rails app. So I'm just kind of doing this on my own, whatever. And we end up at Mark's suggestion, we rent out a 900-person theater. Because of course we can get 900 people in Boston that can't sustain a 100-person conference to come to our conference. So we end up selling 200 tickets. We decide 200 people in a 900-seat space. Not a good idea, so we cancel the conference. We end up not losing any money on it, which was amazing, but we decided we're never going to do that again. That was fun. So we're actually just doing the bootstrapping thing. We also had this great idea that we were going to make money off of advertising, because we have this weekly email that goes out, and we were like, oh, we're going to put ads on it. The email we actually think is really valuable, and we think that if we actually spent some time trying to get advertisers, people would probably advertise on it, but we're so focused on actually getting conferences to use the platform, this has never really been something that's been a priority. But you should subscribe, theweeklycfp.com. So when we first came up with the idea for how we're going to actually acquire conferences, we were like, oh yeah, it's free. Why would you use Google Docs when there's a system that's going to do CFPs for you? Great. We're just gonna it's just gonna go out there. Every organizer is gonna be like, this is amazing. I'm immediately just gonna use it. Marketing. So it turns out it being free, no one really cared. That's okay. We were just like, okay, cool. We actually have to convince people to use this platform, even though what they're using every day sucks, which is good. But certainly did not go to plan. And this is lesson number 2. Nothing you'll ever plan to do in your side project will go the way you think it will, so just assume that everything will go wrong. So balancing your side project. So as I said, Mark and I both have real jobs, and balancing your side project, especially when you have other people using it, is really, really challenging, both in finding time. Mark has a family and kids, I hear that's a big commitment. And we have other interests, not many, but we have a couple other interests. Mark's in a band. But so finding time to balance the side project is really challenging, because you have to prioritize things when if I was working on this full time, all these things would be better. We could actually spend a lot of time on them, and it's heartbreaking. Every day when your baby is suffering because you have to go out and make the big bucks so that you can come home to it and be like, oh, little monolith, let us add some features to you. And the backlog never ends. As you saw in that screenshot, there's 29 things just in the ready state on our Scrum board, because obviously we have a Scrum board. There's always things to do, and it's always a matter of figuring out which one you should be doing, and which one's going to actually add value, which is surprisingly challenging. Because at the end of the day, there's never one fire. Anytime there's one major problem, there's always something else going on. And that's challenging, is what should we be spending our time on? So this, lesson number 3, it's an actual commitment. It's a commitment that people who are using your product, they assume that you're working on this full time every day. They don't care that it's your side project. They actually think that it should work, which it should, but that's oftentimes very challenging. For instance, got an email the other day from someone asking when we were opening up our Australian office, because they wanted to use us, but they couldn't use us unless we were like an Australian-based company. And our response was, we don't even have one office, so like unless like my apartment counts, or like our P.O. box in Wyoming, like that's pretty interesting. So things that have actually worked for Papercall, it hasn't been just failures. This has been going on for about a year and a half now, since we first kind of had the idea. That newsletter, the weekly CFP, we have like thousands of people who use it. It's more or less at this point the definitive source for finding CFPs. And I highly recommend, if you have a side project or a business, find something like this. The weekly CFP is actually hand curated by me. It started off with literally me going on Twitter and like various sites and collecting what CFPs were open, and then emailing the people who were running them and asking for information people might actually want. Because a lot of people who put out CFPs don't think to say things like, when is this due? Am I going to provide you with like travel and things like that? They're just like, I have this CFP out, you should submit to it at some point. They don't realize that people are actually motivated by deadlines. So this is like relatively successful for us. A lot of our organizers found us through the weekly CFP in my random reach outs to them. And that's worked well for us. Papercall itself, we've run 40 conferences. With the exception of James, for some reason, every other conference has had their own dedicated Slack channel to us, directly to me and Mark. I don't know why I didn't give James one by the time he was like messaging me on Twitter, and that seemed to work for us. But every other one, we had this like, we're actually like in the weeds working with them on their CFPs to make sure that they're getting speakers, everything's working. If they have questions, like finding the select speakers button, they know where to look. And that's worked really well for us. It's obviously not scalable at all for us to, anytime an organizer is like, I don't know how this works, they like @channel us in Slack, regardless of what hour, and expect us to respond, which we normally do. And that's worked really well. We have found pain points, made major changes to the app by having that really hands-on in environment, despite the fact that like we both have full-time jobs, where like my Slack group on my computer at work, while no one really notices, I actually do have to do my job at some time. And so like that's the big lesson is do the unscalable things that you wouldn't necessarily do otherwise, because the people who run Google Forms or Wufoo Forms, they're not doing this. People who are building other things, your side project, it doesn't have to be scalable because it doesn't have to be scalable right now. You can find ways to scale later. Figure out how to make it work first. So, the big lesson for us was to know our value prop, and what we were doing that would actually add value. And for us, Papercall is different in the sense that we're not trying to build a better mousetrap. We're trying to build like a cage of mice, and then like sell them to organizers. And like that's a terrible analogy, but I had to work the mousetrap in somehow. We don't offer the level of customization that you can do in a Google form. And there's a reason, because the whole point of Papercall is that speakers shouldn't have to write their talk 16 different ways to submit to your conference. Most speakers have a 1 in 10 chance of being accepted. For many, it's a lot higher, or lower, depending on how you look at it. So we're building a community of speakers who want to speak at conferences. And that's something that knowing our value prop allows us to go to organizers and defend it. If we didn't know that that's what we were doing, at this point we would have added a lot of customization and things like that, and submitting would probably be just as bad as a Google form. In fact, for a while there, I was trying to convince Mark that we should just add basic surveying tools into the platform. He brought me back to Sandy, prevented me from doing that, because we both understand it, but sometimes the business end gets you. So focus on your value prop. Don't throw a conference to go along with your side project. Your conference could be your side project. You shouldn't be doing things like that. It makes no sense. Something we oftentimes have to remind ourselves of. And that's it. That's Papercall. Hopefully you guys have the chance to submit to more conferences.